sincerely owe you guys an apology. I started my channel being so good with giving TBRs and wrap-ups. Every month I gave a TBR, I stuck to it, and I came back and I reviewed it for you. But something happened and your girl fell off, and I have just not been reviewing books on my channel, and it's honestly too much for me to go back and try to catch you guys up on. I've tried to mention the more notable ones on my channel thus far, but I've decided that we're just going to kick out recent read videos when we accumulate enough. It may not always coincide with the fiscal month of the year, because right now it's like the 3rd week of August and I'm filming this, and so I have read so many books in the month of August, but I already filmed a recent reads earlier this month, so it's just not possible for me to fit just August reads in this. So I wanted to catch you guys up on the books that have been taking up the remainder of my month before I get to my actual TBR for this month, because, you know, we struggle out here a lot. So the first book that I read recently was Hench. In Anna's world, there are heroes and there are villains, and there are some people who have supernatural powers, and they kind of get tested for it as children. And Anna is pretty much scraping by, trying to survive, and she needs money, she needs a job, and she finds herself working at a tip agency that hires people out for villains. There are people who can be like meats and muscles for the villain that are kind of used as cannon fodder or security guards or just people who move weapons and whatever back and forth. And then there's people who do like data, clerical work, and that is our girl, Anna. Anna works from home because in her mind, she needs a job, and she knows that. But she doesn't see herself as the bad guy. She doesn't see herself as a villain. And so something about actually going to a workplace and working with a real villain, like out there fighting heroes, that's just too far into the dark side that she's willing to go. And that's not really her thing. She's here for a paycheck. She has to pay her rent. She has to eat dinner. She's not a part of all of that. Something happens where she lands this job working for this villain. And this villain's like, you know what? I need to do this press conference. I need to bring you in, you know, take you out to the field. And she's like, don't really want to, but I guess. So at this press conference, the villain is doing his villainous thing. The heroes come in, and she's just trying to, excuse me, I just need to move. I just need to go home. I'm not even supposed to be here. You know, I just want to go. And she happens to be at the wrong spot, literally at the wrong time, because there's the villain and then there's the hero. And then this is our girl, Anna. She's just walking across, and he like flips her. She goes flying, and her whole leg is shattered. And she's a side thought, like an afterthought of this hero. And her whole life is destroyed because now she can't move. She can't work. You know what I'm saying? She's getting evicted from her apartment. She's sleeping on somebody's couch. She's angry. And so she sits there and she thinks about how many lives have been ruined from the idea of these heroes saving lives. Like when they come to take out the villain, they are breaking down buildings, they're picking up cars, they're throwing it into walls. Like, there's people who own these cars, there's people who live in these buildings. Like for example, her boss, the villain, had a kid that he was holding hostage. And so to come and save the kid who was being held hostage on live national television, he pretty much kills like 5 or 6 people and racks up like $100,000 worth of damage. Not to mention the people who didn't die but are actually physically hurt from their encounter with him. Is it worth, like, is all of the damage that you did worth saving the life of this little kid who probably wasn't even gonna die in the first place? Yeah, sure, he would have got hurt, but he wasn't gonna die. So is it worth other people dying for you to save a kid who probably just would have had a little PTSD, a little trauma? I don't know. And so Anna is consumed with the idea that these heroes are actually bad for the planet. Like, they're as bad as a natural disaster. Like, there have been hurricanes and tornadoes and tsunamis that do less damage than our heroes. And so she sets off and she starts to like target them online, and she gets a whole following behind her. And everybody's like, you know what, you're right. You onto something. These heroes, they're not really heroes, right? Because they're putting us in danger. And so she gets hired by this super big villain. So she becomes in charge of her own team, and they pretty much make the life of superheroes living hell. They target like where they get their dry cleanings done. They make life inconvenient for them. They expose affairs and you know, whisper secrets and encourage like sidekicks to break out and be their own superstars. You know, Donovan becomes his own Batman. She does a bunch of little things here and there to just be pretty much a nuisance to these superheroes and change the way that society sees them. And that's pretty much what happens in the book. Of course, there's other things that occur, but that's pretty much the whole setup for this book. I honestly feel like I made it sound more interesting than it was. it was entertaining. I gave it 2 stars. I feel like it was a little drawn out. It was a little boring sometimes. If you find that idea kind of interesting, the idea of making a superhero's life a living hell, I think that you would enjoy this book. If you read Renegades and you enjoyed Renegades, I do think that you would like this book. But it was just okay. There's probably going to be a sequel to this book, but I don't see myself rushing to pick it up at all. You know, it was just an okay read. Like, I was there and it happened, and I'm not in love. I don't hate it, but yeah, I probably would unhaul this. The cover is just not beautiful enough for me to just hold on to a book that I would probably never read again. The next book that I read was Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and this was marketed as a thriller, but it honestly is not. If you love 1960s, 1970s noir, black and white gangster movies, and I'll put examples of what I'm talking about. If you like those books, you have the comb over Grease, Elvis Presley, cigarette smoking kind of thing, and you have bad guys, you know, being roughed up, then I think that you would like this book, because in terms of atmosphere and setting up that whole stage, I feel like this book really delivered. I unfortunately am not a fan of those types of movies. I don't seek them out. I don't find myself ever leaning towards watching them. I have seen maybe 1 or 2. I don't even know if you can count Scarface as like a real noir, but like, I remember seeing Scarface and I was just like, okay, that was cool. I'm just not a noir fanatic, you know? And so thus, I don't feel like this book was necessarily for me in terms of it being like amazing or gripping. I do really like the writing. I do really like the character work. In terms of what was promised to be delivered, this definitely served up. I'm just not a noir type of girl. But if you are, it really served up like that movie aspect. So we have Maite, who pretty much is jealous sometimes of other people's life, and so she lives in her head on like what life would be like if she was like promiscuous, or she had like a secret rendezvous affair, and like all these different things where like she's reading these books that she wishes reflected her real life. And so she has this neighbor who actually seems to appear to live the type of life, and the neighbor is leaving town for a couple of days, and she needs Maite to watch her dog, and she promises to pay Maite a lot of money. The girl pretty much goes missing, and Maite's like, baby, you owe me some money. So Maite is like looking for her, and the more that she learns about this neighbor of hers, the more that she discovers that the neighbor was actually involved in this rebellion in Mexico City in the 1970s. And of course, there's America's CIA over there. There's also a secret police, and they're basically trying to put down this communistic scare, which actually was a good element of the book. I did enjoy that. I felt like the historical aspect was also really there. That really served up too. And we also have this gangster who is sent out by his boss to find the woman as well, because she has a camera with pictures on it that she's not supposed to have, that's going to be exposing stuff that they don't want to be exposed. So we have Maite who's looking for her, and we have this gangster enforcer who's also looking for her, and that's pretty much what happens in the book. And again, it's really, really like noir style, so I highly recommend it if you do like those types of movies. I gave Velvet Was the Night 3 stars as well. The next book that I read was The Inheritance of Orquídea, Divina, and I really enjoyed this book. It was so short but impactful. I loved the family members in this book. It did become overwhelming at some point in the beginning because there are a lot of family members, and unfortunately they do start to be picked off, and it becomes a smaller collective later on in the book. But in terms of like magical realism, I have not read many books that have that aspect of magical realism, but I feel like this was just done so beautifully well. The writing was beautiful. The prose was beautiful. I love this family so much. I wouldn't say that I wanted to be a part of them because they're kind of cursed, but if they weren't cursed, I would love for this to be my found family, my second found family. This was a joy. In this book, we have this family of Orquídea, and Orquídea doesn't share much about her history. And so she won't tell her descendants really much about her past life, and she doesn't ever leave her house. And again, there's magical realism in this book, so you will have like fantasy aspect or magical aspects that exist in the real world. She kind of lives in this seclusive bubble, and as her descendants grow up, they start to be angry with her and resent her for not sharing or not ever just being honest and open, and like, why does everything have to be a secret? And so they leave home, they go to New York, they go to LA, they start to branch off and do their own thing. They get a letter from their grandmother saying, it's time for me to pass, you know, I'm dying, and it's time for you guys to come and receive your inheritance. And when they come, they're like, what do you mean you're dying? Like, you're still pretty much alive. And so things happen in this book, and she leaves them literally a blessing, and she leaves them magic in one form or another for different descendants. And like, everybody's still kind of angry with her, like literally even on your deathbed, you will not just be open and tell us what's really going on. And she's like, you know, I have to leave you guys protection because someone was after me my entire life and they're still after me and I can't protect you from them. So you guys just, I can't tell you who it is. I can't tell you why they're after you. I can't tell you how your magic works. I can't tell you anything, but just know that somebody's after you and just Godspeed. And they don't really believe her. They feel like their grandmother is just a person who lives in folklore and fairy tales and all these different elements of magic that just doesn't exist in the real world. They totally disregard what she tells them. 7 years later, something happens where they're like, you know what? Family members are being picked off. Family members are dying in weird ways. We need answers. And some of the family members start to feel like they're being followed, and they realize that while the grandmother did leave them blessings and magic, there was also a curse that was placed upon her that has been passed down to her descendants, and the only way that they can actually defeat what's targeting them is to figure out the secrets that their grandmother literally never told them. And so there is an aspect of the book of them traveling back to her homeland in Ecuador to get to know her. But honestly, of all the people that their grandmother has interacted with throughout her life, no one really knows her. She's shown a different part of herself to everyone. So they're kind of picking up pieces and clues as they go, trying to figure out who was Orquídea Divina. I love the grandmother, and I found myself, because I'm getting her backstory as you read along with her descendants, and so you get to know her, and you're like, I was reading this the whole time, and I'm like, you know what? Like, cut her a break. I just feel like that's just a sign of how, like, invested I was in this book, because there are some family members who are like, you know what? That's just grandma. That's just what she does. We're gonna love her anyway. We're gonna love her through it. And there's some people that's like, nah, like, fuck that. Like, what do you mean people are gonna be out after us trying to kill us and you can't tell us nothing? Like, at all? This book got 5 stars. Place your order, go ahead and read it. It's gonna be a fun time. The next book that I read recently was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I read this 50% audio and 50% physical, and I enjoyed me physically reading so much more than I did the audio, and I feel like the audio kind of took away from my enjoyment of the book. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars, but it is a book that I do plan to reread because I feel like this book is all about the experience, and so I want to reread it. I want to annotate. I want to take my time. I want to be immersed in the story because I feel like if I was immersed in the story and invested in the story and annotating and just living the invisible life along with Addie, I would enjoy it more than just kind of listening into it on audio as I'm like cleaning or cooking or whatever. And like, you know, I'm not really sitting and like jumping into the story, and I feel like that took away from me truly enjoying it. So this is a book that I plan to reread. But even with me acknowledging that this book is definitely more about the experience and the enjoyment as opposed to like the plot and like the characters, I still gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I still feel like it was good. I just didn't feel the attachment or the love or like the overwhelming sense of emotions that I know I would have had I not done the audio as well. I think that's something that needs to be discussed more often because I recently reread Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and the first time I read it physically, all 3 books, and I loved the entire experience. And then I reread it with a friend of mine, and they were listening to it on audio, and they were like, you know what, I'm not really in love with it. So I was like, you know, it's not for everyone. But then I clicked on the audiobook, and the audiobook for Daughter of Smoke and Bone is absolutely terrible. I don't even recommend that someone listen to Strange the Dreamer only on audio as well, because I also feel like that takes away from the experience. I know that it is possible for an audiobook to enhance an experience and make it better and to make the enjoyment of a book higher. But then there's also opposite of that where it takes away from the experience of that, and I just felt like that happened with The Daughter of Smoke and Bone and The Invisible Life. The last book that I want to talk about, I read Wish Now, and that is going to be Finlay Donovan is Killing It. This book felt a lot like For Your Own Good, where it was humorous, much more humorous fiction than it was mystery. We have this main character named Finlay. She is divorced from her husband, and he's pretty much harking on her about money and how she needs to go out and get a real job, and writing's not a real career, and she just has bills on top of bills that's happening. She has a stepmother from hell for her children, and she's just overwhelmed with a lot of things that's happening in her life. Finlay is talking to her editor one day about a book that she's writing, and someone overhears it and they think that Finlay is a hitman, and so they leave a note. If you off my husband, I have $50,000 for you. And there's more where that came from. And Finlay's like, I'm not a murderer, like what do you mean? And then things happen, and the body actually ends up being murdered. There's an mystery aspect in this book. This person who hired Finlay to complete this job spreads the word as if that's what Finlay wants, and now other people are trying to hire her to kill their husbands as well. And Finlay's like, I'm not a hitman, but I'm also broke, so maybe maybe I am a hitman. Decisions must be made. I made it through the book. I felt like it was okay. I gave it 3 stars. I do acknowledge that like not all humorous fiction or like comedy parody type books are for me. I don't see myself giving them like 5 stars. I don't see myself being like overly enraptured with them, just because comedy is subjective and what makes me laugh is not going to be what makes everyone laugh. It just felt like one of those movies where like it's just for fun, you just click on it. Like I feel like this would have been a funny movie, and I would not be surprised if this was adapted. There is a sequel coming out to this book at the top of next year that I do plan to read. I know that Chanel ended up like DNFing it because she didn't find it funny at all. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. If you like humorous fiction, I suggest you check it out. It's not terrible. People have loved it. It has really good reviews, but it's just not one that like I fell in love with. That feels like that for like a lot of the books that I've talked about in this video. But yeah, just wasn't mind-blowing. It wasn't groundbreaking. It wasn't heart-wrenching. And that's what I look for when I'm reading my books. Thanks for joining. Thanks for watching. And I will see you guys in my next video.